The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe me.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
The list of impeachable offenses that the framers included in the Constitution shows that the essence of an impeachable offense is a president's decision to sacrifice the national interest for his own private ends. Treason, the first thing listed, lay in an individual's giving aid to a foreign enemy. That is, putting a foreign enemy's adversary's interests above the interests of the United States. Bribery occurred when an official solicited, received, or offered a personal favor or benefit to influence official action, risking that he would put his private welfare above the national interest. And high crimes and misdemeanors captured the other ways in which a high official might, as Justice Joseph Story explained, disregard public interests in the discharge of the duties of political office. Based on the evidentiary record before you, what has happened in the case today is something that I do not think we have ever seen before. A president who has doubled down on violating his oath to faithfully execute the laws and to protect and defend the Constitution. The evidence reveals a president who used the powers of his office to demand that a foreign government participate in undermining a competing candidate for the presidency.
So that was from Stanford, Pamela Karlan. And she laid out impeachable offenses. Obviously, you had other, constitutional scholars testifying yesterday about what is and what isn't impeachable, and that the evidentiary record that has been developed so far clearly shows that the President of the United States not only withheld official acts of his office to benefit himself with and also a foreign adversary, Russia, by framing Ukraine for the CrowdStrike server being there, and also to investigate a political rival, an American citizen who is not even a political rival, Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son. I have never heard of an American president asking a foreign government to investigate an American citizen without that American citizen being charged with something, and then asking the foreign government, if they knew when he was there that he was breaking this or that law. But see, Hunter Biden's never been accused of breaking or charged or indicted or filed against for breaking any law. And so you don't ask a foreign government to investigate an American citizen ever, and then you don't ask a foreign government to investigate the former vice president of the United States because he's running against you in 2020. You also don't ask a foreign government to accept a frame-up job that a foreign adversary, Russia, wants them to cop to, even though there is 200 pages of an investigation completed that clearly indicts and names Russian intelligence operatives and agents who did the hacking. So we have this crazy situation. Now, what about the obstruction? Okay, the obstruction is a huge deal. Because not only did Donald Trump obstruct Robert Mueller when he asked Don McGahn to put a fake file into, a fake memo into the file saying that, nobody ever asked him to step aside. Nobody ever asked him to fire Mueller. Nobody. And what's crazy is Rudy Giuliani was around for that too. And so, lucky you, I save clips. I save all of them. I save tons of them. And this is one of those clips that, you probably pull and you say to yourself, I don't know, maybe one day I'll need this. Maybe one day I'll need to play this again. But this is one of Rudy Giuliani's it's like his first deputy, okay? And he is sitting on TV, and they are asking Rudy Giuliani about his involvement with, putting in fake stuff into the Don McGahn, asking Don McGahn to put fake stuff into a file and blah, blah. And the top deputy to Rudy Giuliani says, Rudy Giuliani knows that Donald Trump obstructed justice. And this has to do with the Mueller investigation.
There was no injury, by the way. We're talking about an inchoate crime. We're talking about something that didn't happen. There was no obstruction. There was no obstruction. They don't point to a single obstruction in their investigation.
Is that true?
You know, it's hard for me to listen to that, and that's not the person that I knew. Of course there was obstruction. The clearest example, and that's the easiest to understand, is what Mueller says, that the president instructed Don McGahn to put a false statement in the file saying that he wasn't ordered to fire Bob Mueller. That is the completed crime of obstruction of justice right there, nothing more. And if Rudy is saying, which he knows not to be true, that if there's no underlying crime that is eventually charged, you can't obstruct justice during the investigation, that's just blatantly false. You know, it happens all the time in white-collar cases where there's an investigation and perhaps the person doesn't eventually get charged with what the investigators are looking into, but along the way he tries to tamper with a witness or conduct to that effect. And that's a completed crime for which he can and does get prosecuted very often.
So that's Rudy Giuliani's top deputy, Jeffrey Harris. Back then, before we got the Mueller report, where we learned that Don McGahn was asked to put fake documents into the file saying, nobody ever asked me to fire Bob Mueller. Okay. So there's that obstruction. And then yesterday, during the testimony of the constitutional scholars, there was a question about the current obstruction of Congress. Have we ever seen a president, ever, Nixon, Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton? Those are the three, Nixon was not impeached. Obviously, he resigned before they could draft the articles. Bill Clinton was impeached and Andrew Johnson was impeached. There was a trial in the Senate of Andrew Johnson, and Andrew Johnson was not removed by virtue of one vote. But have we ever seen a president not cooperate at all, blanketly deny subpoenas, blanketly block witnesses, blanketly prevent anybody, even people that aren't currently with the administration, from testifying? Has that ever happened? The answer was no.
Professor Turley, you've studied the impeachments of President Johnson, President Nixon, President Clinton. Am I right that President Nixon allowed senior White House officials, including the White House counsel and the White House chief of staff, to testify in the House impeachment inquiry?
Yes.
And you're aware that President Trump has refused to allow his chief of staff or White House counsel to testify in this inquiry, correct?
Yes, but various officials did testify, and they are remaining in federal employment.
And that does not include the White House counsel nor the White House chief of staff, correct?
That's correct.
And am I right that President Clinton provided written responses to 81 interrogatories from the House Judiciary Committee during that impeachment inquiry?
I believe that's
Sounds about right. And you're aware that President Trump has refused any requests for information submitted by the Intelligence Committee in this impeachment inquiry?
I have, yes.
Are you familiar with the letter issued by White House counsel Pat Cipollone on October 8th, written on behalf of President Trump, in effect instructing executive branch officials not to testify in this impeachment inquiry?
Yes, I am.
And am I correct that no president in the history of the Republic before President Trump has ever issued a general order instructing executive branch officials not to testify in an impeachment inquiry?
That's where I'm not sure I can answer that affirmatively. I mean, President Nixon, in fact, went to court over access to information, documents, and the like, and he lost.
Well, Professor Turley, I would just, again, refer you back to the history that's been recounted by each of the distinguished scholars here today, because we know, as we recount these examples, that President Nixon did in fact allow his chief of staff and his chief counsel to testify, and this president has not. We know that President Clinton responded to interrogatories propounded by that impeachment inquiry, and that this president has not. At the end of the day, this Congress and this committee has an obligation to ensure that the law is enforced.
I do want always corruption.
So this is unprecedented. The two presidents you're most familiar with allowed for their White House counsels, their chiefs of staff to testify. They answered questions. Go to RandiRhodes.com for the whole thing.